it's really great that Andrew's been able to mobilize that many citizens. And I love that it's all citizen science. It's a really great thing. I thought I'd also briefly introduce Spencer, who's joined us today. And Spencer just recently graduated, well, not that recently, I guess, graduated in from UBC in 2020 with a degree in natural resource conservation within the Faculty of Forestry. Since then, he's worked in various jobs in BC with a focus on reptiles and amphibians and conserving them. Currently, he is the program manager for Fraser Valley Conservancy, which is a land trust organization that focuses on conservation, environmental conservation, and community education. Hey, the same goals as Nature Vancouver. This is wonderful. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to seeing your presentation, both of you. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Donna. I really appreciate having this opportunity to present again. So thanks so much for inviting me to share a little bit about the Biodiversity Galiano project. Yeah, I'm grateful for that opportunity and just want to thank Nature Vancouver for the invitation since it motivated me to get back around to updating the species lists, which should take me a little while to get back around to. So thank you. First, I didn't include this in the last version of this. I'm just going to share a little bit about myself and my background. You touched on it a bit, Donna, but yes, I grew up in Owen Sound, Ontario, on the Saugeen Peninsula, home of Ojibwe peoples. And I recently came to learn actually that my hometown hosts two-thirds of the fern diversity known within the province. These are some of the photos that I took there on my last visit. And even though I grew up amidst this wonderful biodiversity there, my eyes were really not open to it at all back in my teenage years. So it's really only returning there over recent years that I've been inspired to go looking for all the ferns that I've grown up with there. It wasn't until I came to live in British Columbia that my natural history education truly began here on Galiano. Well, you acknowledge Trevor was an important mentor to me. It was really through his mentorship that I got into it. But I would say that my natural history education really began in earnest here on Galiano Island in the territories of Coast Salish peoples. So before I give this talk, I want to begin by acknowledging that everything I'm going to share today draws from a particular approach to describing and documenting species from which we've inherited so much knowledge about biodiversity. I can't speak to the local indigenous knowledge about biodiversity as it's simply not mine to share, of course. But I wanted to acknowledge that many of the species reported for Galiano have, of course, long existed there, long before anyone decided to write down their names on lists. And long have they been part of the stories, cultural practices, and the livelihoods of Indigenous peoples living in and around Galiano Island. So I'd just like to honor the Halkamenim and Senchothan speaking people who have cared for this place long before it was ever called Galiano Island. So I've spent now over a decade getting to know the island's biodiversity by following in the footsteps of naturalists who wandered there before, including a very important figure in my life, Harvey Jansen, who was an excellent botanist, naturalist, and a friend who passed away some time ago. And it was following in these footsteps that I have become increasingly interested in what I'll call the structure of biodiversity knowledge. That is, how we know what we know about the biota of a place. And this network diagram here represents our knowledge of Galiano Island's vascular plant diversities. Just a snapshot of that knowledge dating back to the turn of the millennium. The pink squares represent historical sources of information. And you can see Harvey's name right there in the center, highlighting the importance of his collections, with historical records of plants represented by gray circles arrayed around each source. And fast forward to the present day, and you can see this network grow with so many historical records confirmed in green and the new records in so many shades of orange made by contributors to the project that I began about a decade ago in 2015. And what I love about this diagram is how it shows just that biodiversity knowledge is inseparable from the people who generate it. Every circle here traces back to a person who was paying attention at some point in time, whether Harvey, local naturalists, or an entire community of observers. And without these observers, there's no baseline. And without a baseline, there's no way of knowing what has changed or what may have already been lost. So I like these diagrams. I'm going to get carried away with them this evening. I think that they really help to visualize the significance of community science in action. And in this condensed version of my presentation this evening, I've structured things to emphasize those contributions, um, especially those made during several BioBlitzes that we've organized over the years. So you'll be able to see the growth in that network corresponding to our increasing knowledge of the island and the observations that people are making, connecting them back historically to the people who earlier reported things for the island. So just a quick outline, simple sketch for this talk. I'm going to provide some background on Bio Galiano and what we've come to learn after about a decade of systematically documenting the island's biodiversity. And then I'm going to walk you through the history of the project, which I sometimes jokingly but half seriously refer to as a never-ending BioBlitz. So, oh, it's not advancing. It's okay. There we go. So I initiated, as I mentioned, the project about a year or a decade ago, 2016, 2015, thereabouts. And there's since been over 1,300 contributors to the project, spanning a pretty diverse cross-section of society, I'd say, in a coordinated effort to document the flora and fauna of the island. And so besides BioList, I've sort of made every effort possible to engage people from, well, I didn't say every effort possible, but a great diversity of different forms of outreach and different types of events and stuff that I've organized over the years. And a lot through social media, just encouraging people spontaneously to get out there looking for things. Um, and the last time I updated the species list for the island was at the end of 2023. And back then we'd recorded nearly 4,500 species. About 40% of the reports were new records made by contributors to the project since it began, while the other 60% comprised older records. So that's about 2,700 species. And of those older records, more than half have since been observed by project contributors, whether via iNaturalist or in other ways that they've contributed to the project. It takes a lot of work to maintain a project like this, and as I mentioned, I've not been able to fully update the species list for the island, but this talk motivated me to revisit some of those. And so I've organized tonight's talk as a little tour of the history of Bio Galiano based around several groups of life. And so to share what we've learned over the last decade, I'm going to try and let the data themselves tell the story. So we're just going to breeze through that history of biodiversity research there, past to present, using these network diagrams that are sort of captured my imagination recently. So I just want to revisit that diagram quickly to point out again, the pink squares you see as nodes in the network, they represent historical sources of information. The orange squares that you see around the margins, those are contemporary observers, people contributing to this project who've more recently added observations via iNaturalist. And the green circles, they represent records that have been confirmed or observed by community members. And they're always going to connect back to the historical sources of information. Whereas the gray circles are those records that haven't been seen since they were first historically reported. And the orange circles represent new records of species that haven't been seen historically. And just a note about the dates until we get up to recent times, it goes decade by decade. So the time passes cumulatively up to the date in intervals of decades. So that could be a little bit confusing. I didn't have the chance to update that. So if we go back to 2010, for example, here, this actually represents the decade between the year 2000 and 2010. All right. So as we proceed through my talk, you'll get to see these diagrams grow as knowledge accumulates about the island biodiversity. And what I hope you'll take away from that is that our knowledge of biodiversity is interconnected and centered around the places that people live, and that communities therefore have a very important role to play taking care of it. So we're starting with the marine animals. The earliest record of Galiano's biodiversity dates back to 1859 to a collection made by Alexander Agassiz of this striped green sea anemone. And we know this only because Rick Harbaugh took the time to go through the literature and found this report in a paper that dates back to 1921. And it's really interesting. We found this out just as someone had documented that species during a BioBlitz well over a century later in 2019. So while we initially thought we had detected a newly introduced species, it turns out to be our earliest record. I guess the note that it's actually an introduced species. It's our oldest record for the island. So it's pretty funny that it turned up so many years later, and lo and behold, it turns out to be our earliest record. Fast forward to the turn of the millennium, and you can see there's this huge splash in our knowledge of the marine biodiversity made by Andy Lamb, Donna Gibbs, and others through the Pacific Marine Life Surveys. And we summed up the importance of their contributions in a paper back in 2022, which found that those surveys conducted by this just a group of passionate naturalists, those surveys contribute up to 60% of all novel species reports from around Galiano Island. So the takeaway for that study was that regional community science initiatives can play an outsized role in the generation of biodiversity data. And in the figure here, you can see the Pacific Marine Life Surveys represented in blue there. So the red is records common between sources, and the rest of the colors are all the new records. And yeah, 60% of those come from the efforts of Andy Lamb and others. And I think this says a lot about the importance of the role of the naturalist in communities and society at large. Only are they out there contributing large amounts of important biodiversity information to the scientific community, but they're also writing amazing books like The Marine Life of the Pacific Northwest that some of you may know. So they're putting a lot of effort into raising awareness and appreciation for biodiversity more broadly so that people can notice the species around them. Another community member to recognize on Galiano since moved to Pender Island is Carol Wall. There's nearly 100 records under her name, including many new species reports and confirmed historical records. Here's a picture of a sunflower sea star, a giant of the Pacific. I think it's among the largest sea stars in the world. And those of you know who anything about that, these sea stars have been in decline in the past, but you'll be happy to know that there have been a decent number of reports around the island made by community members recently. I think I counted 7 observations since 2021. So they are making a comeback. So in 2017, we organized a BioBlitz, and that adds another splash to our diagram here. We confirmed 19 historical records, added 11 new records to the list, and one of the examples is this little chitin that was observed by Scott Gilmore, who's a big contributor. Mostly invertebrates, but mostly insects, I'd say. In 2019, we organized another BioBlitz that added 9 new records and 28 confirmed historical records of the marine animal diversity. We coordinated this BioBlitz actually between Galiano and Main Islands both with the help of the conservancies. So I brought out more than one community in those efforts. And I remember, well, we also teamed up students with various naturalists and researchers from the universities, which was a really neat way of fostering mentorship and learning in natural history. I couldn't leave out this one really remarkable report that actually made the news in 2023. It earned my friend Zeus the moniker of BC Man in the headline. That was really neat because, as some of you may know, white sturgeon, they're really rare to be spotted offshore. And my friend had an up-close encounter as he was scuba diving up at the north end of the island and got this photo. Here's a fun find, fish that was found floating on the surface of the water. It was found in 2024 by Ian Guthrie, and he noticed this spiny lobster inside its mouth and inferred that it must have choked to death. Who knows? But a hitchhiker, I guess. And this is one of those observations. I think Andy would refer to it as a 2-in-1 because you get both species, and both end up being new records for the island. So as a quick summation of what we've learned about the marine animal diversity, there are almost 700 species of marine animals known to occur in waters around Galiano. Of these, 600 reports are based on the historical baseline that was established early on by people like Andy Lamb, while 82 of those records have been added new to the list since the project began. The 600 taxa known from historical sources, half of them being observed by the community since, and the other half remain to be observed. Moving on to the terrestrial invertebrates. The earliest record of this group dates back to 1927 to this report of a weevil wasp. And I kind of threw this in there as an example of people often call into question community science records, but it's a good record of a historical source in a collection, a specimen that sits in a museum. So, maybe more professional sources of data, but it's very likely this species does not occur on Galiano. When I looked up its distribution, it occurs east of the Cascades, and this sometimes happens. I've gone through a lot of collections in the past. You'd have to review historical data Whether or not it comes from community science or, expert research scientists, data are always in question. So some groups like insects especially require a lot of forensics to clarify the historical record. In the 1980s, the Cannings brothers, especially Sid Cannings, accompanied Jeff Scudder on Galiano for some of his forays. And I think I might have overlooked a previous slide. Oh yeah, I skipped it. Jeff Scudder is one of the major collectors, an entomologist, pretty well-known research scientist within Canada who passed away fairly recently. Um, and their observations of Jeff and the Cannings and others, they form a really important baseline record for the change we've seen in the island's bumblebee fauna since the 1990s. I did some work on this during my master's and was able to show evidence for the likely extirpation of several bumblebee species that had not been seen for decades since those early collections were made by Jeff Scudder and Sid. And based on their work and stories that have been shared with me by a local Indigenous elder on the island, there's evidence not only of extirpation, but also of continuing change in this community. There's some new data that I haven't had the chance to share yet on that, but more to share later. Here's an example of a butterfly species, another notable collection made in the 80s by the botanist Gerald Straley, who passed away in 1997. It's a species that's not been observed on the island ever since the 80s. So if anyone wants to go looking for a missing species, I encourage you to check it out. Go visit Galiano sometime in the early spring when the stone crop is still blooming. In 2017, I organized amongst community members to sample bees using blue vein traps, and these were all identified by Lincoln Best. And this added a few new species to the list, included the narrow-legged miner bee. And these surveys continue. I think there's a BC Bee Atlas now, and I got an email recently from someone who's heading out to Galiano to collect more bees. The other BioBlitz we held in 2019, see more new records. The network expands, including this fire-colored beetle. You know you're in really good company. Well, you're in the company of serious naturalists, that's for sure, when they can identify beetle species in the larval stage. And not only that, of course, they know exactly where to look for them. Our last BioBlitz happened in 2023. It involved over 100 participants, too many names to list, and one of the major contributors is a Vancouver local, actually, Chris Ratzlaff. He's been one of the most systematic contributors to the project in recent years. He even took all of the bycatch off my hands after my 2018 field research, and he has these jars that even now I still have more specimens to get to him because he's systematically going through everything and trying to find all the new things, including, for example, this really beautiful weevil that I think he found in a Gary oak. I'm not sure if folks know Leon Reagan. He's also been adding lots of interesting, obscure things recently. And this Oregon leaf miner is a very good example. It grows in the paraderm of young conifers like Douglas fir and Grand Firm. You could see maybe the image isn't very big here, but you can see the tracks through the skin of the tree there. And finally, for this group, I'd be remiss not to mention the huge contributions of Kevin Toomer. She now includes over 300 notable records, whether confirmed historical reports or new species for the island. And many of those are moths, actually. As some of the folks in this community might know, the Lepidoptera are among the most diverse group of insects, with over, I think, 1,200 species reported for the province, at least a third of which are known to occur on the island, which is really rather astonishing. So summing it up, there's now over 1,500 terrestrial arthropods reported for the island. At present, the community has observed about 75% of that, so over 1,000. And of these records, 187 represent historical reports that have since been observed by project contributors, and 900 represent species reported new for the island. So a huge amount of diversity there. I think moths are a really important group. If ever you organize a biodiversity project and you want to add new species to the list, that they're a great one to target. They sort of, you just have to turn on the porch light at night and they'll show up right at your door and you can go and take photos and chances are you'll find something new. But in this group, there are now almost 400 species still at large, about a quarter of the total diversity. And a lot of that will be very obscure things that are pretty challenging to identify. And that brings us to vascular plants. The earliest records go back to the 1920s, 1930s, and they're all mustard for some reason. So I don't know why, but William Newcomb and others on the island in that period of time were interested in mustards, such as this native tower mustard. A lot of our historical knowledge of the vascular plant diversity on Galiano can be attributed to Harvey Jansen, who collected it extensively throughout the island since the 70s before he passed away in 2021. So you can see the significance of his contributions here in the center of this plot. The leathery grape fern is one example of a plant that he collected on the island that has never been seen since. Harvey also he created a really neat summer internship opportunity for Angela Wood, who got this, I think, the dream job of spending a summer on Galiano just collecting plants back in 1975. I actually had the chance to meet her, and here she is sharing her notes of the field collections she made that summer. And those include this record of Spanish clover, which is yet another example of a plant that hasn't been seen since she collected it back in 1975. I chose this beautiful violet, which is restricted to the bog at the north end of the island. It's a very rare habitat in the islands. I chose this in memory of Hans Romer, who passed away recently. Along with Harvey, Hans contributed to the inventory of the ecological reserve on the island, which protects that rare habitat type in the islands. Hans also, he conducted a survey of the grasslands up on Mount Soodle back in 2004. So when he passed away, I couldn't help but think of patches of Romer's fescue foregrounding vistas over the Trincomalee Channel up there. Really beautiful site. That grass was named for him. Um, and as an aside here, Harvey's contributions expand here. Seems like there's a bunch that show up around this time in 2010, but that's really only because a lot of his specimens aren't what he collected aren't digitized, so the data is not available. And so a lot of those records they come from a list that he published in around 2001. So they fall into that decade. Here's our BioBlitz in 2017. I'm just featuring a neat sedge, or a rush rather, that Judith found, Judith Holm, who started the Squamish Biodiversity Project. She found that at the Ecological Reserve at the north end of the island. And this is an example of a rare plant that is known only from one spot on Galiano in the backyard of Sarah Tweedale, who faithfully revisits every year, and she shares her beautiful photography with the island. So it's a great example in places like the Gulf Islands where so much of it's private property. You just wouldn't even know such species exist were it not for outreach to community members through projects like this. So by 2020, we documented about 70% of the island's vascular plant diversity, and we decided then we'd set out to determine whether some of the historically reported species might have disappeared. So we identified 10 species that Harvey and others had reported historically, and then we set out over the course of 4 years searching intensively. This figure here shows the sites that those rare plants reported historically at top left, and then otherwise it just sort of paints a picture of the increase in our knowledge of the island vascular plant diversity before the project began on the left and then after. Here's Hannah Carpendale with Harvey Jansen searching for the Alaska rain orchid, which had last been collected by Harvey from Stockade Hill in 1981. And Harvey sadly passed away less than a year later on May 10th, 2021, just as we'd sort of set out with this project. But a month after he passed away, that orchid was found by an intern at the Conservancy, Audrey Irving Broke at Montague or Sumnew. And that was four decades after Harvey had collected it on the island. Here's Shauna Anderson documenting a population of Trifolium dichotomum, or McCrae's clover, up on Mount Galiano in June 2022. That species had last been reported for the island based on a herbarium collection made by Harvey in 1981, so it had gone undocumented for more than 40 years. After searching high and low and really intensively at certain historical sites, like here on Mount Soodle, we were able to redetect 6 out of 10 of those plant species we were looking for. And four of those species seen here on the left were not found and are likely extirpated from the island. So through this effort, we were able to develop a novel approach to detecting extirpation, which recently appeared in the journal Plants, People to Planet. And I just want to acknowledge this, well, that volume that it was published in makes it emphasizes the importance of digitizing herbarium collections to understanding biodiversity change and so much more. And the journal I think is appropriate called Plants, People, Planet because of course just as important as the historical data like vector specimens and such in museums, it's the living knowledge of people like Harvey, who, while he was still around, was able to give us really important information for the redetection of some plant species. And so, yeah, it was just a sobering reminder that, of course, not just biodiversity, it's not only biodiversity that's subject to extirpation, but so also human knowledge and memory of biodiversity. So vascular plants are definitely among the most well-documented groups on the island. The numbers of new records are decreasing year after year, and most of them tend to be introduced species. But we still find remarkable things like this undetermined species of a mosquito fern, Azolla, which was documented by Emma Mention, seen here with Diana Srivastava of the Living Data Project at UBC. Through the support of the LDP at UBC, Emma is now playing a really important role helping to preserve Harvey's legacy through the digitization of his records. And she's continuing that legacy as well, working with folks in the botany community to create frameworks that communities can use to track biodiversity, especially amongst vascular plants like on the Salish Peninsula. It's one project she's working on. There are now over 800 species of vascular plants known for Galiano. Together, the community's documented 87% of that diversity, leaving just over 100 species at large, including just 64 native species that remain to be found. Which brings us finally to the reptiles and amphibians. This is the abbreviated version from the last talk. And I'm just gonna quicken the pace here to create some brief context for appreciating the talk that Spencer's about to give. Because we have here, back in the 50s, I believe, a report historically of the Pacific gopher snake, which I think was largely dismissed by the herpetological community. And then in 2019, Jessica Kirkwood, a local in the community, she got this amazing video of a snake. And it was pretty flabbergasting because when it was circulating at the time, even then, people were in disbelief. People were convinced it must just be a garter snake. But for the community down in the US, who I put Spencer in touch with, and I'll let him talk more about it. But I did want to share the video. See if it'll play here. That came to light. Mm. So there's interesting things to note about the behavior and the complexion, the phenotype of that snake, but I'll leave that to Spencer to follow up on. Oops, let's see here. Just to illustrate this idea that the project, represents a never-ending bioblitz of sorts, I want to pass this on to Spencer, who's going to carry it away from here by sharing a little bit about his efforts to follow up this intriguing report of a snake. So on to you, Spencer.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everybody for having me come and present again. I'm really quite happy that I can share this knowledge that I took the time to gather. And that video that Andrew just showed you really did inspire me to do this whole thing. I mean, I saw the original post on iNaturalist with all the comments, all the disbelief, and I went, well, that's incredible. I need to look into that myself. So I did. I eventually got around to it, and what I'll talk about just now is kind of a little bit about that. But big thanks to Andrew, Kevin Toomer, who he mentioned earlier, and Alan St. John, who is one of the gopher snake experts down in the US, who helped me get onto the right track and do the baseline research I needed to even have a clue of what I was doing on the island. So a little bit about me before we get into the actual presentation. As I mentioned, I graduated from UBC in 2020, and I have since been to quite a lot of places in the province and focused a lot on reptiles and amphibians. That picture that you see there is me doing some snake research in the Okanagan, which really helped me develop a lot of the techniques that I use looking for the gopher snake on the island. And as mentioned earlier, currently I'm working for the Fraser Valley Conservancy, and that includes a lot of work with Oregon spotted frogs, which, in case you don't know, are Canada's most endangered amphibians. So a quick account of the gopher snakes that we're talking about here. The one pictured, unfortunately, is not a Pacific gopher snake. That's our other subspecies. And I had to use that picture because, well, spoiler alert, nobody's seen the Pacific gopher snake in quite a long time. But the Pacific gophers are one of several subspecies that are here in North America. There's quite a lot of different subspecies. And as a group, the gopher snakes range all the way down even into Mexico from here. But the Pacific gopher was originally here in BC and all the way down to California. And it was thought to be extirpated from BC and Washington State. But since our last presentation, I have a bit of an update on that one. There was a very recent, I think February, observation from Washington of the Pacific gopher. So leads us to believe that, you know, if they're there, they could still be here. Good news for sure. Further south in Oregon and California, they're definitely more abundant. There's no shortage of them there, especially in the Willamette Valley. And they're pretty big. They get up to 6 feet in length, though up here it's unknown if they would have ever gotten that large. And of course, they're gopher snakes. They eat gophers, they eat rodents primarily. So there's a few historic sightings in BC, well, 2 to be exact. The earliest one that I know of is from 1866, which is pretty much right at the border in Abbotsford, pretty close to where I am now, actually. And then the one that we're most interested in today is the one from Galiano Island, which was in 1957. And this was done by someone named A.I. Ortenberger, who was a herpetologist living on the island. And as Andrew kind of alluded to, this was met with some skepticism back in the day, but eventually it was declared to be Pacific gopher, and the specimen is now somewhere at the Royal BC Museum. I need to look into that and see exactly where, but it's supposed to be there. So modern sightings, there aren't any, essentially, besides that one video that you saw. That is it. That large snake with that posture, with that behavior on the road, as Andrew mentioned as well. People thought it was a garter snake. People thought it was something else. Nobody believed it, but it has the coloration of this specific gopher snake subspecies. It certainly acts like a gopher snake, which in other words is cranky. And it simply doesn't have the body type of a garter snake. And of course, the experts down in the States took one look at that and went, yep, that has to be a gopher snake. And of course, I agree, which is why I'm so interested in all this. And just as a quick note, BC does have another gopher snake species in the Okanagan, and it does not make its way past the Coast Mountains. It does not overlap with the potential range of the Pacific gopher. So any chance of it being that outside of a few strange occurrences is pretty much zero. So I went on iNaturalist in 2019 and I went, wow, this gopher snake is so cool. It definitely inspired me to get out and do this. And eventually I got around to contacting Andrew through the Galiano Conservancy. And then later through him, I talked to Kevin and Alan St. John, who's, like I mentioned, is a gopher snake expert. And I set out to basically learn whatever I could about where this animal might be, whether the habitat's suitable, just what was going on. So last September, I spent 5 days camping on Galiano and pretty much just going out every day to search as much of their potential habitat as I could and try and investigate it to see if it's suitable, to see if there's things to my eyes looked like they could be great for snakes. So one of the main tools that I used was simply walking around. Thanks to Andrew, who pointed me towards Bluffs Park and Matthews Point. That was my main focus area here. And on the picture, you can see where I walked. I took GPS tracks while I was there, and I tried to cover as much of the habitat as I could to both get an idea of what it looked like and to see the suitability overall. Generally, I would start in the late morning, which is when it was starting to warm up for the day. And in theory, that's when the snakes would be out moving around. And I spent a couple hours, 3 or 4 generally. And I just looked. I surveyed for the first 3 days just by myself. And then on the 4th day, I was able to join up with Kevin. And we explored some slightly different habitat that he had recommendations to go and check out. And of course, I'm in the habitat. I want to check it out, but I also want to preserve the integrity of it as much as possible. I stayed on the paths as much as I could, though I definitely did wander off at points to investigate particularly interesting objects or fallen logs or potential habitat. And so the other main way that I looked for these snakes was driving surveys. Now, this is a tried and true snake finding method that people all over North America and beyond use to look for reptiles on roads. As it gets towards nighttime, lots of reptiles will often go onto roads because they're warm. They retain the heat longer from the day, and these nocturnal animals will come out and try to soak up some of that while they prepare to do their thing for the night. So I typically would go out just before dusk, and it started near a field which was open. It was grassy. There'd definitely be rodents there. It was potential gopher snake habitat. And I followed a road. I followed the road all the way down through the habitat near where I was walking during the day. And I did this twice each night. So all the way from my starting point to the end, which hopefully you can see is near shore access 14, and back. And I did that twice. Usually went about until it was pitch black. There was no real light by the time I was done, and there were a ton of false positives thanks to sticks in the road as it got increasingly dark. But unfortunately, as we'll discuss in the next slide, wasn't any snakes that turned up. So the habitat looked good to my eyes, to eyes that have seen the interior gopher snakes, to have seen their habitat. It looked good. You can see a few colored dots on the map, which I probably should have made bigger in hindsight. Those are habitat features that look like they were notable, that look like a snake could have used them. So for example, this picture on the right, it's a cliff in the open sunny area. It's south facing, which is perfect snake denning habitat. The Okanagan subspecies, they will overwinter and den in south facing slopes, and it's pretty much perfect looking from the outside. So I took this picture as an example of what a great potential habitat could look like. This particular spot was described to me by Kevin as a seep, so probably a little bit too wet for the gopher snakes to be in there in this exact spot, but looks wise definitely has the sorts of things that the snakes would look like, or look for, I should say. And of course, the other dots on the map is potential shed sites. These snakes will rub against rocks to shed their skin, and lots of potential basking sites, rocks protruding from the floor of the forest, little sunspots that poke through the canopy, all the sorts of things that a big snake in the forest would need. So unfortunately, I did not find any gopher snake presence. This includes stuff like sheds, feces, the actual animals themselves. I was unable to find any of that. However, my time looking at the habitat was definitely useful, as it gave me insight into what the island is actually like. That was the first time I'd been there. So seeing the habitat was really, really useful for me, just to say, yeah, I definitely think there could be snakes here. And after I went to the island, I reached out to some folks that I know in the interior who did snake work there and snake tracking there, to confirm that, yes, in fact, the amount of habitat on the island is actually big enough to have a population of gopher snakes. So their study, they had tracked interior gopher snakes, see how much they moved. And basically, I was able to use that data to guesstimate that there is enough space for these animals. Of course, the time of the year when I was there did affect a lot, and it was a very hot and dry September, which definitely would have affected things. Even more common species like garter snakes were hardly out. It really isn't an ideal time to be surveying. You want it to be a little cooler, a little wetter. So in conclusion, just because I didn't find anything doesn't mean there's nothing there. I can definitely use the interior gopher snakes that are probably the closest living population of related species as a great starting point. All of this I did on my own time, out of my own pocket. It was purely because I wanted to. But that said, if this is to be decisive, if we are to find something, unless we get very lucky, I need to do more time and put more resources into this. And of course, getting more eyes on the landscape really does work in a situation like this. I know this very well because at my job, the Oregon spotted frog, there's perhaps 300 of them left in Canada. And there's no way our small team of 5 provincial and nonprofit biologists can find them all. We need eyes on the landscape to find this existing species. So finding a snake on an island as large as Galiano with just 1 or 2 sets of eyes is pretty much impossible. So more people, the better. The more volunteers we have, the higher the chances are we of finding this thing. And of course, there are other available options for doing this research? Are there available options for trying to detect this animal? But these cost money and time, which I have very limited amounts of. So hoping the project going forward can get a little bit more than just me on it, but I will happily continue to look into this on my own time. And spreading this information to you guys is great, because who knows who you'll talk to, who knows who this information will reach, and hopefully, you know, a few years down the line, maybe even this year, we can get a sighting, and wouldn't that be awesome? That's all for my quick presentation. Thanks again to everyone having me here. One final tidbit is unrelated to my presentation, but my work at the Fraser Valley Conservancy is currently doing a fundraiser to try and help migration of western toads out in Chilliwack. We need people's help to raise enough money to actually do the work this year because of funding cuts. Unfortunately, reducing our capacity to do the work we would really like to do. So if any of you are interested, feel free to check out the GoFundMe link in the chat and potentially donate. We would really, really appreciate it. And it could save thousands upon thousands of tiny toadlets. Thank you.
Okay. So, Andrew, I have a question for you. So, these network diagrams are fabulous. Where can people see them except on this recording?
I've shared a few when I came upon them. I actually am using them for my research. That's how I stumbled upon them. Totally different field, looking at like in photobiont networks.
Oh,
And then realizing just how visually impressive they are, I just had this notion to try it out with the Bio Galiano data set. And so they don't live anywhere else, but if you were to search on the Bio Galiano Facebook page, you'd probably find some. Um, IMERSS is working on updating our websites and everything right now. So at some point, I'll make an effort to share them more widely.
oh, that's great. It's really fun to see the historical people that you've read about or that you've know somebody who knew them, and to um, have a chance to be part of that community and be one of the good spots on one of the diagrams. And so the gray dots are the ones that are historical records that haven't been confirmed recently. Is
Mhm.
there a place to get a list of those in case a bunch of botanists want to go and help hunt,
That's a
for
really good
example?
question. Yeah, it's an excellent question. I wish I had prepared a slide on this. We've been working on this forever because that's essentially the well, if you were to gamify Bio Galiano, that would be kind of it, right? Putting out the hit list of things to find. And that's what I did early on. Actually, I would set out just challenges to the community to look for different things on those historical lists. And so, yeah, I realized the particular way that we're accounting for biodiversity in the islands is actually really powerful and useful as a way to guide community science efforts. And so we've been working on different visualization tools for doing that. It just so happens we've drifted away from Galiano a little bit to focus on other areas. I've been working on the Howe Sound Biosphere, for example, and Emma right now is working on the Saanich Peninsula. So um, there will be tools online to support just that sometime soon. It's just a funny thing that I'm gonna have to come back around to Galiano to update it for that one. So.
Okay, well, good luck with that. I think that's going to be a lot of fun for people since they have to learn some of the easy, common ones first before they can start hunting for the interesting, elusive ones. Okay, and uh, I guess I just had a comment for Spencer, which was, are you going back in September?
To be determined at this point.
Okay.
Things are slightly different with my actual work this year, but I do definitely want to get out to the island again at some point.
Okay, so I guess the gopher snake is going to be one of the gray dots, or maybe the ghost dots at the moment, that the Galliano team can go have a look for too if you're not out there. But I'm so sorry that there were so many sticks on the road. And-
Oh yeah, it was constant. Like every turn, every night, I'd be like, "Oh, that's a snake," and of course, it's not. And when I did actually find a few garter snakes on that was the most exciting. You know, you hop out of the car and run over, and of course, it's a common species, but gets your heart pumping for a moment when you think you found something really special.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, people don't know what it's like to go look for these things and until they hear a few real stories. So good luck and maybe it will show up soon.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
I know
Well,
on, I was just going to say, Vivian, on Salt Spring, my sister has a sign for the road near us. And uh, if anyone sees Bryony stopped on the road, they know that there's a snake or a salamander on the road that she will quickly run out. But we do see a lot of roadkill, unfortunately. We see the red-legged frogs, and we see a few snakes and salamanders that unfortunately are succumbing to speeding on the road. Well, just it's hard to see them, you know.
Yeah, and
Anyway,
just a little off topic, but that's exactly what our toad fundraiser is about. The
yeah.
toads unfortunately migrate across our road, and we need the help from funders to try and get fencing in there so we can direct them to the toad tunnel. And
Yeah.
trust me, it really, really makes a huge difference. I've done that toad migration for a few years now, and it makes like unbelievable amount of difference from thousands of mortalities to dozens.
Mm, mm. They haven't found their way there yet.
No, we hope they will learn one day, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, we can help you get the word out through Nature Vancouver members.
Hmm.
We want to help
Hmm.
save some toadlets too.
Yeah, that's
Well,
fantastic.
so I guess just going to say thank you very much to both Andrew and to Spencer for coming out again and giving us this presentation and allowing us to record it. And when it's posted on the website, we'll send you an email so you can share it with all your friends too. So thanks again.
Thanks, Vivian. I just want to say too, I mentioned in the beginning, I think that I gave a bit of an abridged version from the first version. And I realized after the fact I had acknowledged members of the Nature Vancouver, like Kent Brothers, I believe. He was a big contributor to Bio Galiano, and Olivia Lee, I'm pretty sure she probably walked in your circles. So there's probably other names as well. I just wanted to acknowledge that Nature Vancouver has also, through its membership over the years, made a lot of contributions to Bio Galiano. So thank you for that too.
Okay.
Great. Well, it's wonderful work, you guys. Keep it up. Yeah. And the historical part is so important, as Vivian said, to remember who's doing this work, who's been and gone, unfortunately. So, yeah. Thank you.
So I have a question. My curiosity is that um, the difficulty in inviting people to find things that haven't been previously reported is that they don't appear on iNaturalist. iNaturalist just reports sightings, right? So is there some way to um, enhance iNaturalist with lists of things that people should be looking for?
I think last year there was actually an effort. I can't remember the name of there's a lab out east of all places, like in Ottawa, or that gamified INAT in this way. There was this cross-country thing called Blitz the Gap that attempted to do just that. So I was very interested in seeing that. And it didn't seem to, I'm not sure how it's going to continue this year. Something to look out for. You might actually see something on INAT suggesting it's.
Yeah, there was something on iNav for to find Canada's missing species.
Oh, that sounds like a good punchy
So
line.
that is actually on the iNat website. I can't